The air was thick, heavy, like Polish pierogi dough. Everyone waited, holding their breath. Judge Kowalski, stern face, looked down at papers. Big case, divorce, bitter.
Man, well-dressed, stood straight.
Wife, eyes red, clutched a tissue.
Little girl, pigtails bouncing, sat beside her.
Man spoke, voice smooth like he was selling you a used car, said wife crazy, unfit mother, wanted full custody.
Little girl, she shifted in her seat, fidgety. Then it happened. She jumped up. No, she shouted. Daddy lying?
Silence, everyone stunned. Judge Kowalski peered down, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on everyone present. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next.
"Quiet, young lady," he warned, his voice echoing through the silent room. His stern gaze fixed on the young girl standing before him, her small frame trembling slightly under the weight of his scrutiny. The judge's words were firm, but there was a hint of something softer in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps.
But the girl, she couldn't be stopped. Her eyes, wide and determined, shone with a fierce light. She stood her ground, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had a story to tell, a truth that needed to be heard, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her. "He is lying!" she cried, her voice ringing out clear and strong. The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had preceded them. She looked around the room, her gaze challenging anyone to doubt her. This was her moment, and she was going to make it count. "He told me to say, 'Mommy mean,'" she continued, her voice trembling slightly now. The weight of her confession was heavy, but she pressed on. She had to get it all out, had to make them understand. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she had to say next. "He said, 'If I don't, he'd take me away.'" Her voice broke on the last word, a sob catching in her throat. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, a raw, visceral thing that tugged at the hearts of everyone present. She looked so small, so vulnerable, standing there alone.
The courtroom gasped. A collective intake of breath, a ripple of shock that spread through the room like wildfire. Murmurs broke out, people turning to each other, their faces etched with disbelief. The truth was out, and it was more horrifying than anyone had imagined.
The wife, tears streaming, reached for her daughter. Her hands shook as she extended them, her heart breaking at the sight of her child's pain. She wanted to hold her, to comfort her, to make all the hurt go away. But she knew that this was just the beginning, that there was still so much more to uncover.
Man's face, it went white as a sheet. The courtroom was a sea of tension, every eye fixed on him. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment it seemed like time itself had stopped. The weight of the accusation hung heavily in the air, pressing down on everyone present.
He sputtered, "Lies! She's confused." His voice cracked, a mix of desperation and anger. He looked around, seeking support, but found only cold, hard stares. The words he spoke seemed to echo back at him, hollow and unconvincing. His hands trembled as he pointed accusingly, trying to shift the blame. But his eyes, they darted around like trapped flies. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his pulse raced. He could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting with every passing second. The jury's eyes bore into him, dissecting his every move, every twitch. He was a man on the edge, teetering on the brink of collapse.
The judge, he slammed his gavel. "Order! Order!" he boomed. The sound reverberated through the room, a sharp reminder of authority. The murmurs died down, but the tension remained, thick and palpable. The judge's eyes were stern, his patience wearing thin. He demanded respect, and the room fell silent in response.
But the damage, it was done. The accusation had been made, and there was no taking it back. Whispers spread like wildfire, each one adding fuel to the fire. The courtroom was a cauldron of emotions, bubbling over with shock, disbelief, and a hint of fear. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the weight of the moment. The girl's words, they hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Her voice had been steady, her gaze unwavering. She had spoken her truth, and now it was up to the court to decide. The silence that followed was deafening, each person lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the gravity of the situation. The truth, it seemed, had a way of making itself known, no matter how much one tried to deny it.
You could hear a pin drop. The air was thick with anticipation, every eye in the room fixed on the defendant. The judge's gavel had just struck, signaling the beginning of what would be a pivotal moment in the trial. The tension was palpable, almost suffocating, as everyone waited for the next move.
Then, whispers started. They began as soft murmurs, barely audible, but quickly grew louder as speculation spread like wildfire. People leaned in close to one another, sharing their thoughts and theories in hushed tones. The courtroom, once silent, was now alive with a low hum of conversation, each whisper adding to the growing sense of unease.
Like the rustle of wind through the birch trees back in Krakow. It was a sound that brought back memories of simpler times, of peaceful walks through the park, where the only worry was the changing seasons. But here, in this courtroom, the whispers carried a weight, a sense of foreboding that was impossible to ignore.
People murmuring, looking at the man with suspicion. Eyes narrowed, brows furrowed, they exchanged glances filled with doubt and mistrust. The defendant stood at the center of it all, his face a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. He could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent accusations that hung in the air.
The wife, she hugged her daughter tight. It was a gesture of comfort, of protection, as if she could shield her child from the harsh realities unfolding around them. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she held her head high, determined to be strong for her family. The daughter clung to her mother, seeking solace in her embrace.
A small smile like a sunrise, breaking through the tears. It was a moment of hope, a glimmer of light in the midst of darkness. The young girl, despite the fear and uncertainty, found a reason to smile. It was a reminder that even in the most trying times, there is always a spark of hope, a reason to believe in a better tomorrow.
Judge Kowalski, he knew something was wrong, ordered an investigation.
Turns out the man, he had a history. Lies, manipulation. He'd done this before, used his own daughter, a pawn in his game. The truth, like a stubborn weed, had finally broken through the cracks.
That little girl, she taught everyone a lesson that day. Honesty matters, even when it's scary, even when powerful people tell you to lie. Her courage, it was like a beacon shining through the darkness.
The judge, he saw the truth, awarded full custody to the mother.
The man, his lies exposed, left the courtroom in disgrace. Justice, sometimes, it arrives in the smallest of packages. A little girl with pigtails and a heart full of truth.
That day in court, it wasn't just a divorce case. It was a testament to the power of honesty, a reminder that even the smallest voice can make a difference, and that sometimes the bravest heroes wear pigtails.